Welcome back. Let's talk about higher order functions. Now, higher order functions are simply a function that can take a function as an argument or a function that returns another function. That's it. That's all higher order function is. But the big problem is that most people know what higher order functions are, but don't really understand why they're useful, why we care. So my challenge in this video is to make you understand why higher order functions are useful. Let's get started with the first one. Let's start off with function and see what sort of problems we have with just a simple function. Let's say we're creating a system for our company where we have to let users log in. So I'm going to just naively create a function called letAdam login. And this simple function is going to do some sort of work to authenticate the user. In my case, just to keep things simple, I'm just going to create an array, an empty array, and we're just going to simulate the type of work that the system might need to do. So let's do a for loop that says let I equal to 0. That's not 0, that's O. And let's say I is less than a big number. And then finally, we increment I one by one. And in here, we'll just do array.push the index. So we're doing something completely useless, but just to slow down our system so that at the end of it, hopefully everything works out and we can just return access granted to Adam. Good job, Adam. So that if I run let Adam login, I get access granted to Adam. But you saw that there was a bit of a pause there. If I add an extra 0 here and I run, you see that there's a bit of time that takes to grant access to Adam. So for now, just think of this as some sort of an authentication login service that the company has. All right, so that's great. We just created a function that lets Adam log in. But our company has more employees, right? What if we also have Ava? Well, Ava needs to log in as well, so let's create another function for Ava. Now, this function for Ava, instead of let Adam log in, will be let Ava log in, and we'll change access granted to Ava. And then we can call that function let Ava log in. Now, I'm going to change the zeros here, just so it's a little bit faster. And I'll click run. There you go. Access granted to Ava. Perfect. Now, what's the problem with this code? The principle that we always hear as developers, dry. Do not repeat yourself. We've created some code that is not very flexible, right? For each user that we have to copy and paste code and repeat ourselves. And imagine if we had hundreds and hundreds of employees doing this every time. Well, that's not very clean, is it? It's not very efficient. It's not very easy to read or reason about. So how can we fix this? Well, let's move on to our next level. Let's go from a simple function to a function that accepts parameters to gain some superpowers. Let's have a look. Instead of doing this manually, let's remove this and let's create a generic let user login function. And this user is going to accept a parameter, user, that will give access to some user in this case. Well, let's extract this piece of code out first. So let me copy this out. And ideally, we want some access to be granted to a user. So let's say I do let user login, and I'll do Adam. If I click run here, access granted to Adam. And then if I do let user login to Evan, and by Evan I mean Ava, I get Ava some access. Now let's refactor this code a little bit to make it cleaner. I'm going to create another function. And this function will just be called give access to that accepts a user. And this user, and you know what? Let's use an arrow function here just to change things up. And this arrow function is going to return access granted to the user. Or let's just say name, so that we're being descriptive here. Now, due to the nature of arrow functions, and because I only have one line, I can do this and not wrap it in a curly bracket, and this automatically gets returned. So that now I can just say give access to. So what superpower did we just gain here? Well, we leveled up over here because in here, we've done something amazing. We now tell the function what data to use when we call it. So remember, before we had a function, and that function, when we actually called it, decided what to do with that data. Instead, we now have a more generic function that says, hey, I'm going to give you later on some generic piece of data. I don't know what yet. But when I pass you the user, do some sort of functionality to it. So that instead of defining Ava or Adam inside of the function, we can just define that later on when we actually invoke the function. So we have the ability when we call the function to define the data. So we essentially have a bit more flexibility. Instead of when we define the function telling it exactly what needs to be done, we can delay that until execution time. And this gives us, as you can see, more flexibility. We kept our code dry. Awesome. That's great, but I thought we were going to talk about higher order functions. Well, let's see how we might have another problem here. What if we have, instead of just a user, we also have admin, somebody with a lot higher privilege? Well, we'd have to copy this code and this time around say let admin log in. Let me remove the comment from here. And this time around, instead of just a simple user, it's an admin. And this admin, we have to give it access. But because they're admin, they have to go through a bit more security procedures. And let's say it takes a little bit more time for them to get authenticated. So the function has changed a little bit. We have a different loop here, a different permission process. So what did we do here? Well, we just copied more code. We're not being very dry, are we? And imagine if we had many more roles in the company. Instead of just users and admins, maybe we have managers. Maybe we have secretaries. Maybe we have guest access. So what can we do here? And this is where higher order functions are going to come into play. Remember this. We ran from functions with parameters. That way, instead of just saying when we define the function exactly what to do and what data to use, we're able to now say, hey, we define the function what it does, but later on we'll tell you what data we need. With a higher order function, we get to do both of those things when we actually call the function. That is, we can give it the data and also tell the function what to do or some extra abilities when we actually invoke it. So let's see this in code. This time around, let's create an authenticate function. And this authenticate function will take a parameter, which is the verification process. In our case, we'll just give it a number, which is the time of authentication. So let's just do verify. And inside of this function, we can just remove this authentication process that we keep writing everywhere. And the number will just be the parameter verify so that it's more dynamic and we can change it according to the user or the admin. So we have the authenticate, and just for fun, let's just return true, saying that, yep, we've verified everything, you can have access. Like I said, a little bit of a useless code right now, but I hope you get the idea. Now, we have the authenticate function. We have the give access to function. How can we make these functions better? Well, instead of let admin login, let user login, let's remove these. And instead, let's just create a general function, let person function, that accepts a person as the first parameter, and then a function as the second parameter. And remember our definition of high order functions. It's either a function that returns another function or a function that accepts a function as a parameter. So that if inside of here, I say, let's do a simple check saying person.level is admin. In that case, we'll call a function with the 5 or 500,000 loop. Remember, this is going to be verify later on. And then we'll say else if person.level is user. Their level of authentication won't be as intense, so we'll just say function 5 or 100,000. And then afterwards, we can just return give access to, and then this person will also have a name. So how did this make things easier? Well, let's have a look. I can now say something like let person, and this person will be an object that has level user. And remember, this level is going to be used to decide if they're an admin or a user. And the name will be decided for giving access to that person. We'll say this is Tim. And now the first parameter is the person. And the second parameter is the function. What should we let the person do? Well, we want to authenticate the person. So that, let's make this a little bit smaller. Or actually, it doesn't really help. All right. So now we let person authenticate. Let's see if that works. If I run, all right, access granted to time because I can't spell Tim. All right, and if I change this to admin, and let's say this is Sally, I run this, access granted to Sally. What power did we just gain here? Well, we've now gained the power to not only tell it what data to use, but we also got the power to tell it what to do. So the function as well. So we created a generic function, let person. Remember how we had just let Adam log in, how very specific that was. Instead, we have a more generic let person that accepts a person as the first parameter, and then a function, in this case authenticate, as the second parameter. Now, this over here wasn't very descriptive. We could have just said authenticate here as a parameter and have it a little bit more descriptive. But by making things general, we can now do something like this. We can add a function, let's say function sing. And this sing will take a person. And this person, well, will be able to sing. So I'll just do return la, 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 my name is, and then add person.name. Because our let person function is more general now, is a higher order function, because it accepts a function as a parameter. Yes, let person is a higher order function. I can now say, instead of let person authenticate, I can say let person sing. And if I run this, well, I'm still going to get access granted to Sally because we have this return give access to function here. maybe, again, to make it more general, we can remove this and maybe add it to the authenticate function right here at the very end. And in here, all we really do is just return some generic functions. Remember, a higher order function returns other functions. So that here, instead of just giving a solid number for admin and user, we can just give it the person parameter. If I click run, look at that. La la la, my name is Sally. We're able to let person be a lot more generic and do many more things to it. Now, we did break a bit of functionality here in that the verify now needs something a little bit more. Perhaps we can do some sort of a conditional saying that if person, we pass in the person, right? If person dot is an admin, then we'll do this sort of authentication. But I hope you get that. What we've been able to achieve with higher order functions is this ability to tell the function what to do during invocation. We're able to have a little bit more flexibility than we had before. We're able to keep our code dry and a lot more flexible. Let me show you one more example, just to make sure that we got this. If I had a function, const multiply by, and I want this function to be a generic function that I can just create multiple functions from it, calling them multiply by 2, multiply by, let's say, 10, so on and so forth. How would I go about doing that? And you know what? Instead of me just showing you, how about you try this yourself? And in the next video, I'll show you how we can do this.